All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in this evening. We've taken our normal slot on a Tuesday night for congregational leaders that we normally have a Monday 4 o'clock and a 7 o'clock, and we've combined them tonight to sort of have a special session on being prepared to sing again. So you've got preparing to sing again, and then you've got preparing to sing back better. So there's two, whichever your political affiliation might be, we can either, prepare to sing again or prepare to sing again back better. But let's begin with a prayer, and a prayer for all of you. O God, whom saints and angels delight to worship in heaven, and be ever present with your servants who seek, through art and music, to perfect the praises offered by your people on earth, and grant to them even now glimpses of your beauty, and make them worthy at length to behold it unveiled forevermore. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. So it's my joy I think I hand over to Mark or Patrick at this time. I think to Patrick. Patrick is the member of our task force on regathering, and I'm inviting him to, if he can introduce us to our topic, and to Mark, who will lead a presentation with us. So very grateful, Mark, for your leadership in this endeavor as well. So Patrick, over to you.
Yeah, so I'll share a couple of resources, but first of all, thank you, Bishop Allen, for dedicating this time to this topic, and Mark as well for dedicating your time to this group this evening. And thanks to everyone for putting your faith and confidence in the Regathering Task Force and the work we've done in what has been now over a year together in doing that and navigating this time and this process. The Regathering Task Force started to get a number of questions about singing. And when could we start singing again? And as we have done in the past on other topics, we recognize that we are not the experts on this. And so we sought out expertise. And about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, maybe almost exactly 2 weeks ago, we had Mark join the Regathering Task Force to give us his perspective on how he has approached singing and what he has done as a professional musician with the groups that he works with. And it was really informative. It was really helpful. And we thought that it would be fantastic to bring his expertise to this whole group. So we're doing that tonight. Mark is a professor of music at Central College and chair of the music department there. He directs the choral programs at Central College. And many of you may be familiar with the work that he does at the St. Paul's Cathedral as the choir director there and as the organist for the cathedral. So he'll talk tonight about the work he's been doing at Central College, but also very specifically at St. Paul's in Des Moines. Before I hand it over to him, I will mention, and I'll just share my screen, and I'm gonna, oops, let's see, do I want to continue? Yes, let me do this. I'm gonna share my screen here, and just point out, as you are likely all familiar, you've been using the Abounding in Hope resources page. And this is where we have the phase regathering guidance, the Abounding in Hope document, Tableau, and our dashboard is undergoing some maintenance tonight. So you'll get a spinny circle there today, but that finishes in about 30 minutes. Perfect timing, right? And what we have added here as a beginning are some resources from Mark specifically about music and singing, and just really good information there that you can dive into for more details as a follow-up to tonight. So just know that that is there. And we are going through the process of looking again at how to add and update the Abounding in Hope guidance to reflect what we now understand about singing. So without any more ado, let me switch over to the infographic that we have prepared as a resource for everyone for this evening, based on the conversation we had with Mark. And Mark, pass it over to you. You might have to unmute. There you go.
There we go. Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Bishop Scarf and the Regathering Task Force, and everyone for having confidence in in the experience and expertise that I think I've had, at least in the past year. I would just add from what Patrick explained from my work at Central College and at the Cathedral, I also am the president of the Iowa Choral Directors Association, which is about a 700-member organization in the state of Iowa. And as you can imagine, it's mostly teachers and church musicians, but choirs from across the
I can
state.
hear Alan, but I can't hear this guy. Can you hear anything?
Hello?
Well, we can,
Can you
I
hear
can
me
hear you.
okay?
I'm
yeah,
hearing
we can
you
hear you
fine.
fine, yeah, right.
Okay. You can imagine that the choral directors across the state and have all had to wrestle with this. And so partly by necessity, by the work that I do at Central College, but also as president of ICDA, these were issues that we had to wrestle with right away. And so some schools, some churches elected to do nothing for this whole year. Others took a graduated approach. Others have changed their protocols as the science and as the information has changed. So what I will share with you today in the documents and the information that I gave to the Regathering Task Force 2 weeks ago are based on changes that we have made as this last year has gone, based on the research and the science and the professionals that have given us advice for ICDA and ACDA. And the resources that Patrick directed you to that I provided, there is so much information out there that you can get lost and you can sometimes not know what's good information, what's valuable, what's been vetted. The American Choral Directors website is one of the best because that's vetted by professionals from around the country and peer reviewed. And so I would just direct you, if you forget things from today or you need specific information that maybe apply to your own situation, you may want to go to that link as a resource. Let me explain what the Preparing to Sing document that Patrick shared a little bit about. And these are guidelines. They may need to be adjusted for your situation, but these are basic guidelines that I think have been very helpful. I will note that a caveat that at this point, my choirs at Central College and the Cathedral Choir, and specifically, anyone who's singing is vaccinated. And so that allows for some changes. But these guidelines are based on not necessarily knowing if everybody is vaccinated. So masks must be worn at all times. Cathedral Choir, my choirs at school have worn masks at all times. There are inserts that help with singers for breathing and not sucking in the mask. There are singer's masks that you can explore that are helpful for both containing as much aerosol as possible, but also allowing the singer to sing with a little more resonance and not suck in the mask when they breathe. But we still wear masks at all times. Large ventilated spaces. Maybe I'm a little more fortunate, but at the college and at the cathedral, we have large spaces where we can both space out, but we also have the capacity to bring in increased outside air, which is extremely important. We also prop open doors, windows when that's possible, and increase ventilation all around. We also, as we've started, as the years progressed at school, at the cathedral, and in other places where I've been a consultant, we suggest starting with very limited singing. So not singing 5 verses of a hymn robustly, but maybe a verse. Maybe not as much singing as you did in 2019 before this happened. Maybe not as robust of singing and shorter rehearsals, at least in one space. The guidelines from ACDA are 30 minutes at a time in one space. What I've done with my choirs is split them up into smaller groups in sectionals. We've also, at the cathedral, we've rehearsed in the choir room for 30 minutes and then moved through the large hallway up into the nave and rehearsed more in the nave, given ourselves 2 different spaces to sing in. Humming doesn't produce as much aerosol, so those are ways to limit as well. But in general, limit, take baby steps, cautionary steps as you reintroduce singing back into services, rehearsals, etc. Plan ahead, create clear paths for movement and seat assignments. I actually put name tags on. I put the seats around and put name tags on, or in the case of school, my choir manager does that. But if you just tell people to keep physically distanced, as well-meaning as they might want to be, they get close to each other. So at the cathedral, I put the chairs in very specific places and I put their names on them. And that's worked really, really well. And we do that at school as well. We also changed our routines in terms of where we walk and when we move. We don't go through narrow hallways anymore, and we only have one directional traffic. Those are ways of helping. I would also say that for some of my choirs and choirs across the state, especially as we get into better weather, it's not ideal for resonance, but singing outside is obviously one of the safest. And we found great fun with that last summer, excuse me, out doing some outdoor singing. One other caveat that I might put for the limited singing is that with all of my choirs, with all the choirs that I've consulted with and all the choir directors I've consulted with, we all dialed back our expectations and our repertoire, meaning maybe singing a bunch of new music right now isn't a good idea, but to sing very familiar things and to sing things that are simpler, to take a more modest approach and to simplify, especially when you're restarting the singing. And then finally, the monitor personal health. I rely on the fact that the choirs that I work with are thoughtful, mindful people, and that given good information and giving clear instructions, that they want to do the right thing. And so people have been really good about communicating, about self-quarantining early on. That's not as necessary now that they're vaccinated, but early on, being extremely careful about monitoring their own personal health and hand sanitizer, all of those kinds of things, which continue. I think those are the 5 main points on the preparing to sing. Maybe I will just say one other thing. When I first started and I presented to the regathering task force, one of the first things I thought about in preparing the document was Erik Routley's "A faith so strong it must sing." That is a quote that I've held to my whole church music career. I'm unique that I'm a college professor and a church musician. Sadly, a lot of college musicians have abandoned the church for a variety of reasons. But I believe that a singing faith is important. People were born with a human voice. It's the first natural instrument. And there is something profound about connecting a sung faith to one's personal faith journey and to being able to join one's voices with other voices. And so I applaud the bishop and the regathering task force for finding careful, cautious, safe ways of reintroducing singing to our public gatherings. So I think that answers a little bit of the why this is important. And I think that we have learned in the last year that there are safe ways to sing effectively. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm also happy to let Patrick jump in if he would like to.
So Mark, we've got some good questions that have come in via chat, and I'm kind of curating that mentally as they come in. So I think we should visit on some of those. One of the first questions was about what kinds of singers' masks are out there, and Meg has posted a couple of examples, links to examples. I'm curious what kinds of masks you've tried or you've used with your choral groups.
So we've used the singer's mask, that was the Broadway project. We used those. Most people reinforce those with some extra cloth. They do give you a little more space, but I wasn't completely convinced, at least early on, that they provided enough protection, I guess, if you will. So we enforced them with a little more fabric, but they give you a little more space. The other thing that we found at school for our opera were these little inserts that you can put in a really high quality mask, but they just move it out a little bit, so you have just a little more space in front of your mouth. Those are 35 cents, and if you need help getting connected with those, I'll help you find them. They're really easy to get.
Great. And then there was a question about congregational singing, thinking about groups of 15 to 30 in that range, which is probably a typical size for some of our parishes across the state. Any thoughts on, just how they should be thinking about this? I mean, it's almost like it's worship, but it's like rehearsing a small group, or thinking about small groups starting to sing again. Just anything specific to that size.
So specifically, I think it's important to just indicate where people can sit, because if you spread the seating out correctly, if you have a couple that's together, or a pod, or a family of people that are together, and you're spread out, that's first and foremost, that you get people spread out. So that's the same for a small congregation as it would be for a small choir, that you get the space and that you have the distancing.
Great.
But I do think it's important to have seat assignments.
Then there was a question about singing outside, which I'll take up a little bit. And Mark, you may have some thoughts on this as well, because it was one of the things you mentioned as just highly recommended. It's obviously very safe. In terms of whether masks are required for singing outside, and this is the kind of thing where if you make a one-size-fits-all rule, it can result in some nonsensical guidance, in the sense that I think if we're generally talking about what most parishes in the diocese are doing right now in terms of outdoor worship, you're worshiping outdoors, you're spread out, you're intentionally creating some space, you're using that outdoor space to have people within their households, and making that just a natural way to worship, with the advantage of being outdoors and having the space. In that context, I would say masks are certainly welcome, but not necessarily required. It's really, when you start thinking about, if you go on revival, you're like kind of in a tent that's not quite outside, but it's, maybe it even has walls, and so you're not really outside, or you have a large group of people that are, close together in close quarters. Even though you're outside, if you're really, putting a lot of people in a smaller physical space, you're really going to want to wear masks. That's the wise and prudent thing to do, even though you have the advantage of outdoor air, moving through. So that's what I would say. And I'm curious, Mark, what else kind of you've seen or heard or thought about? I mean, maybe you've thought about, the Episcopal Church in Iowa is not an outdoor festival kind of event, 500 people. But what have you heard about, some larger outdoor events like that, or with singing or not singing?
We did a bunch of outdoor singing at school in the fall in our amphitheater, and we wore masks. We were at least 8 feet apart at that time. Again, I think what was key was what we were singing, because if it was difficult, then it wasn't rewarding. But if it's music that's almost memorized, that feeds the soul, but simpler and memorized, that's in terms of the kind of music. I think you have to look at your own circumstances in terms of the guidance. If you're all outside and you're vaccinated, that's different than if you don't know who's there, and how spread out you are, and how large the space is. And And if it's a tent versus open air, you know, those kinds of things, you just need to weigh all of those. It's people want a one size fits all answer, and that can be kind of hard to do sometimes. So.
Well, and that's probably a good bridge to talking a little bit about vaccination and vaccination rates. I mean, there's a context where, you know, like what you're working in, the context you're working in, Mark, where, you know, you're a choral group, whether it's the students or at the church, you know each other, you have confidence in, you know, being able to share with each other your status, and either asking or maybe at the school even requiring vaccination in order to participate. You can maybe talk a little bit about that. But then there's also the broader context of, in worship, to your point, Mark, you know, unfortunately, it's often the case that we know everyone we're worshiping with, but we want to welcome and imagine that people are coming in the door and invited to do that. We might not know each other. We might not know each other's vaccination status. So in that context, a good resource to be aware of, and I'll screen share this. I've shared this before, and I think it's worth looking at again. There's information on a site called COVID Act Now, which is very reliable information. It's drawn from CDC databases and state of Iowa databases that shows very front and center what the vaccination metrics are available at a county level across the whole state of Iowa. And I'm directing us here, even though the state of Iowa has published vaccination information, which I'll also flash here just briefly, and I can put these links into the chat. But what you'll notice in the state's vaccination data is that it's all raw numbers. It's just the number of doses administered or the number of individuals who've been vaccinated. And really what that needs in order to understand and put it in context is to be looked at as a percentage. So what percentage of individuals in your area have been vaccinated? And that's available in real time, updated within the last 24 to 48 hours at the COVID Act Now site. And what you can see when you look at that, and this is comparing counties across Iowa. I'll try to zoom in a little bit here. Apologies if the text is on the smaller side. But you can sort this by county alphabetically or by population, all that. The thing I wanted to point out is just the range of vaccination rates. And so Cass County, I don't know why, but they're at the very top of the pile in Iowa, almost a 79% vaccination rate with one or more doses. And that's for the entire population of Cass County. Then you get down to, you know, some bigger counties like Johnson County is also pretty high, among the highest, but still only approaching a little shy of 60%. This is again across the entire population. This is not of those percentage of those eligible to be vaccinated. I think Johnson County, last I heard, of adults specifically age 65 and over, I think they're at about 90% vaccination rate for that older demographic. That's harder information to get at. That's not available here or anywhere else. I just know that from public health folks in Johnson County. But this gives you a sense of broadly across the public for your county, what the vaccination rate looks like for the whole population. And that's something to keep in mind as we think about creating a welcoming worship space and starting to relax some things over time. These rates from a whole population basis perspective do need to get higher before we really truly relax a lot more. But this is where you can find the information, and just wanted to direct folks there. And again, I'll put it in the chat. So maybe Mark, you can talk a little bit about the way in which you've had those conversations about vaccination with your choral groups, members of those groups. How does that conversation unfold? Sure,
because it can be a little uncomfortable. You're talking about, you know, for me at school, there's HIPAA. What happened at school, which I was really pleased with, was my choir officers in a meeting voluntarily said to me over a month ago, because we had vaccine clinics on campus, said, we've all been vaccinated. They just volunteered that and said, we'd like to make a pitch to the choir just to encourage this. And they did. Choir members encouraged each other, which took a little of the pressure off of me. And then the students self-monitored that. So it was very student-driven. But similarly at the cathedral, what happened, well, people would start coming back to rehearsal that we hadn't seen for months, even though they'd been in communication with us. And they would say, I'm vaccinated, that's why I'm back. I'm vaccinated, that's why I'm back. And then younger members who were more savvy at navigating the vaccine system would help other people and direct them how to get, and their families, et cetera. And so it became a thing in the cathedral choir where there was an advantage, there was some motivation to doing this and talking about it because it meant that we all felt better about it. So there was just an openness amongst the cathedral choir members to talk about it. And so last week, there were 21 people. That's the most we've ever had, 21 people back, and all 21 were fully vaccinated. And that gives people a level of confidence, but it also has built a sense of trust and communication. And yeah, so it kind of organically happened in my groups because they care about each other. And so they were willing to talk about it, and it took a little of the pressure off of me.
That's great. That's great. I'm going to come back to some questions that are in the chat. And so there's a series of questions here that are about kind of around the idea of how much singing. If a service is a certain duration, or if the singing is at the very end. So the first thing I would say in response to all those questions is, if the service is outdoors, then and Mark, I'd be interested in your perspective on this if you differ at all. But if the service is outdoors, I wouldn't be so concerned about, whether the singing is at the beginning or at the end, or if it's for 30 minutes or 3 hymns versus 2 hymns. So start, if you're worshiping outdoors, if you're thinking about this outdoors, then I wouldn't even be worried about those things. But as we think about being indoors, maybe start with this question about an idea, a practice that one parish is doing right now, which is to sing only at the very end, sort of a closing hymn, and then depart as a strategy for managing things. I'm just interested in your reaction to that.
And several churches have started with that kind of process of doing it at the end. Maybe a little about what I was, maybe giving a little bit of background to singing. Remember that it's an airborne virus, and this is all about aerosol. And so the reason singing is considered at all is because it can produce slightly more aerosol than talking. But remember, if I'm talking really loud, if I'm saying the Lord's Prayer really, really loudly, that's not the singing isn't producing scientifically, in terms of numbers, it's not producing more aerosol than if I'm singing it versus talking. It's about volume and intensity. So some of what that means is we should limit, if we're not all vaccinated, if we're not sure, if, even with masks and distancing, we want to limit the velocity, the volume, and the amount of, I would say, that singing and loud talking. So I don't think you have to do what you're comfortable with. And if it's just singing one hymn at the end, but I think you could sing one verse at the beginning and then have a long period of not anything. And then you might have maybe you have you sing something later on. Again, it's short, but there's been lots of space. There's been a homily between the last time you sung that. So there's been time for any aerosols to clear the air. So I don't think it's about that you just have to sing at the end and then get out of there. I think it's doing less singing at first, and thinking about the intensity of that singing, how long, and the intensity. That's the consideration with the aerosols.
I think you raise a really good point, Mark, because we tend to, we're thinking about singing and we can get very tunnel vision on that as an activity. But, there's canting, there's chanting, there's praying, saying the psalm together in unison. If you're doing that because you're really excited about the psalm and you're doing that all together, some of these things can be managed in a thoughtful way, for example, by having the psalm be one person read it versus everybody reciting it together, if you're indoors especially. and that maybe makes some room for singing if singing is something you want to do a little bit more of. So maybe thinking about all of what you're doing in unison, whether it's singing, reciting, or chanting, any of those things are things to be mindful of. I know the other thing, I mean, there's a question about service being an hour. So how much of that hour might be singing? We can talk about that. I think in general, again, kind of easing into things, starting with services being just generally a little bit shorter. If you haven't been in the building for a while and you're starting to worship together in person again, starting with a 30-minute service, maybe 45-minute service, encouraging a shorter sermon, maybe whatever it takes to keep that worship service within that time frame. But Mark, thoughts that you would have on sort of that overall duration.
And that's what we've done at the cathedral too. Is I think that our services are shorter, fewer verses of a hymn, less singing than we would typically what we would have done 2 years ago. So it's shorter is good, shorter and less, modest.
Great. Scanning through other Wendy. I wasn't directing that necessarily to you, Wendy, about a shorter sermon, but nothing personal there. So great. I think we've covered a lot of the questions that have come through in the chat. There's a question about we were looking at COVID Act now, whether the vaccination rates were where you live versus where the vaccine was given. I believe that's based on residence of the vaccinated individual. I will say that when you look at the state of Iowa's reported vaccination data, the state of Iowa shows it both ways, and it's kind of confusing. But the state of Iowa's dashboard, you can see numbers based on where the person who resides lives, the vaccinated individual lives, and then separately you can see numbers based on where vaccinations have been administered. And that's just kind of confusing. Again, I would probably refer to the COVID Act Now site as a simpler view of things, a cleaner, clearer view of things. So is there anything, I'm scanning through the chat. I think we've caught a lot of the questions that came in on chat. Is there anything that I missed? I don't know, Meg or Bishop Allen, is there anything?
I'm sorry, I hate to jump in. This is Stephen. I'm just trying to type and I wasn't fast enough. So before you hang up, I'm just
Oh, no, we're not going there yet. Please, yeah, go right ahead.
And just because I'm kind of a stickler for details at times, I noticed that especially when we talk about congregational singing, so the recommendations that were listed early on seem to be typically around high quality masks, singers wearing N95 masks, like good masks. My experience with congregations is that most of them do not wear that. They wear simple cloth masks or homemade masks and things of that nature. So I'm just curious if that is a concern, given that congregational singing probably is not going to be under that same level of control that you would have in a choir group.
Well, what I would recommend is that maybe you give some written communication about that. People have to, in some ways, we're relying on others to do the right thing. And so what I have tended to do with all the groups that I have worked with is communicate obsessively about what and why. And so if you can share some of the information about what it is in singing and talking in a large group setting or a large group setting, what that's doing and why you want to diminish that, probably, I don't know this for sure in your situation, but in most situations, it's not the average pew sitter that's singing that intensely. It's probably the more trained musicians that matters for more, but I don't know.
And I would add to that, underscore definitely the communication part and really actively communicating some of the rationale and some of the concerns and some of the things that we're just doing to actively mitigate risk. And I would then add to that consider either folks encouraging a group within the church to maybe sew 3-layer cloth masks and make those available. Maybe consider purchasing some N95 masks. For folks, to go to worship and then leave with an N95 mask is sort of a blessing in itself. They're much easier to get now than they were 12 months ago, even maybe 6 months ago. And so I know, for example, the Ace Hardware here in town, in Grinnell, you can walk in the door and they've got a whole stack of them, and you can get N95 masks. On Amazon, it's now very easy to get KN95 masks, which aren't as good as the N95 masks and they aren't certified in the same way. But for our purposes, for congregational singing and for just safer worship together, they certainly serve that purpose well. So yeah, Mark.
And then I was just going to add that the ACDA link addresses specifically in great detail, kind of helping people, communicating with people and helping people understand the levels of risk and all of that. I found the ACDA Preparing to Sing guideline, it's quite lengthy and it's a lot of information, but I found it really, really valuable and helpful. So you might look at that, because I took bits and pieces of it to use for my own communication.
And then there's a question about rehearsals and choir rehearsals, and how much time, well, related to rehearsals or related to having multiple services, how much time to allow the space to kind of rest between groups occupying it to worship or sing.
That is in that ACDA document, and I think it's an hour. But I'd have to look it up to be sure, but you can see it there. I think it also depends on how able you are to circulate fresh air in. Again, in some of my spaces, I'm lucky. The cathedral choir room has two outdoor doors right into the courtyard, and it has 4 doors into hallways. So the airflow, I mean, that's just a stroke of luck that room just has such great airflow and fresh airflow. But that's not the case in all places.
Mm-hmm. Great. So then I think there's maybe a couple questions we haven't touched on. Thank you, Meg, for consolidating and scanning those a bit. So a question about cantors and thoughts on whether someone who is willing or often volunteers to cantor but is not vaccinated, is that something that we should be mindful of, and how might we address that?
Well, if I had a cantor who was and who wasn't, I'd choose the one who was. And partly it's because it's there needs to be some motivation for vaccination. So that's just, now if your only choice is an unvaccinated person, then you've got to check other risks, and I guess I would ask them a lot of questions about what their behaviors are during the week, what they're doing, why they're not vaccinated. I would prefer to have a cantor who's vaccinated. All of ours are.
And then there was a question about, and this is probably more about the regathering guidance, specifically for the diocese, about outdoor congregational singing being okay. And I should check myself a little bit here, but that is the direction that we are going in. That worshiping outdoors and worshiping with congregational singing outdoors is the safest way to do those things, and that's what we are actively encouraging. And then there's a question about how to best transmit sound, and you've probably worked on this, Mark, for some of like the Eden Song or other things that you have broadcast through Zoom or through Facebook Live. What kind of microphone setup or how to set things up so that the sound of folks singing is best transmitted?
Well, again, I'm going to just say that I'm lucky that I'm surrounded by people who are experts in that area. At the cathedral, we have one of my young alums, Austin Rosendahl, who is an expert in that area. And so he's been able to do that. If some, I guess the better thing would be, because that is real specific, the kinds of, it's not that it has to be so expensive, because it's not necessarily, but I would be happy to provide some specific information. What you need, what works for recording or transmitting the human voice for speaking, and for instruments, organs, pianos, singing is different if you want good quality. And we fortunately realized that early on, and we've gotten that figured out at the cathedral, but it took a little while, and it does take some expertise, and it's probably more than I can give, and more than I can give in 30 seconds. So feel free to use me as a resource, and I'll direct you to folks that might be able to help you, or at least to give you a little bit of guidance.
And I can say that what we've done at St. Paul's in Grinnell, being the scrappy, very determined congregation that we are, we've found that any of the moderate to higher quality external, like USB powered mics, that are, they'll generally have either directional setting or sort of an omni surround setting. So depending on the configuration of the room and where the singers are located, you might use either the directional mode or the omnidirectional mode. But any of the USB microphones that are well rated on Amazon, they're generally in the $60 and up price range, will probably do you just fine. And then it's a matter of connecting it, making sure it works with the laptop or the device that you're using to broadcast, and then making sure you set Zoom on the audio settings to use that microphone. And specifically choosing that as the source of sound. So, I mean, that would be the nutshell version of how to approach that. And, beyond that, maybe follow up with Mark or some of the other folks that have that technology expertise, and we can get you that information. And then using the Zoom setting for music, which is turning on enabling original sound. That's a feature that you have to go under the microphone settings. You can make it possible to broadcast under original sound. And then when you're doing that, in the upper left corner of your Zoom screen, you'll see an option. If you're a host or a co-host, you'll see an option to turn on original sound. And then that will allow a more continuous stream of audio through the device where that original sound is enabled. So that's how folks like Meg at the start of the session was playing some music. I'm pretty sure she had original sound turned on so that was continuously feeding through her laptop to the Zoom session. And similarly, if you're hosting worship and you turn on original sound for that external mic, that should give you that continuous stream of music. And you can even turn that off at points where it's not singing, or you're not trying to have a continuous broadcast from the church. Maybe you have folks who are doing lessons remotely, and so their audio is the audio that you want everyone to hear and to prioritize at that point. So that would be a nutshell on that. So then a couple other questions that are specifically about regathering and regathering guidance. So the question about stage 2 or phase 2 and phase 3 guidance for regathering. So it's really phase 3 where we are looking at indoor congregational singing with the guidance that we've been talking about tonight. So phase 3 being the place where that is something that we are moving towards, and talking about updating our guidance so that in phase 3, congregational singing with the precautions, the safeguards we've talked about tonight is the direction that we're moving there. In stage 2, we're still talking about singing together outdoors, and having worship outdoors with singing together outdoors being the safe way to do that. And then a question about masking and whether masks are required when singing or worshiping outside. I mean, I think the most cautious guidance to give would be yes, use your masks outdoors when you're gathering to worship outside, and especially if singing, chanting, canting, doing other things together outside. There's a level of sensibility there where, this is Iowa, and if the wind's blowing and everyone's, 8 feet apart, how much, the CDC is generally moving in the direction of outdoors being very safe, and starting to relax the notion that masking is needed outside. In no small part because people are increasingly vaccinated. So what's the level of risk outdoors in that context? It's just very, very, very low. But hopefully that answers the question. I'm dancing. If I haven't given a direct answer, it's because we are still revising that guidance and making sure that we're all on the same page about the phased guidance that we're providing via the diocese. So I don't want to personally get ahead of that, but I'm indicating the direction that we're going in. So. And let's see, is there another question just came in. Is there a certain percentage of vaccinations in the county when the cathedral plans to sing all verses? And will we still be masked at that point? I don't know, Mark, if you have a threshold. That's probably a question for our epidemiologists.
Yeah, I don't know that answer yet.
Yeah, I mean, so keep in mind when we talk about, thresholds of population vaccination, and the questioner, Dan, who asked the question, mentioned, 70% is a threshold. It's going to be a long while before we hit 70% vaccination rates at a population level. And that's unfortunate, but just true. It's, a confluence of things. We are still administering vaccines under an emergency use authorization. And that means you have to get it through public health or through federal, distribution programs, right? So that is one factor in play in terms of some folks' willingness to get vaccinated or the ease with which they can get vaccinated. When your primary care physician can have a conversation with you about getting vaccinated and then directly administer the vaccine to you, that's going to help overcome a good amount of hesitancy that's out there. Right now, everyone has to make a personal decision to go to Hy-Vee or public health and get vaccinated. So that's a limiting factor. Also keep in mind, we only just barely now are getting approval for the Pfizer vaccine for, I think, the 12 to 15-year-old age range, right? So that is, I think we've cleared the first hurdle, and maybe the CDC is still finalizing that guidance. But that's something like probably 10% of the population of Iowa is that age bracket, right? So if when that portion of the population can't be vaccinated, then the highest you can get to is 90%, and that's if everyone else were vaccinated. And never mind that 12 and under still can't be vaccinated. So, the highest we could get to today, if absolutely everyone who's eligible for being vaccinated went to public health or went to Hy-Vee and got vaccinated, is about 80%. And that's a very hard thing to do. We're just not going to get there in the mode we're in right now. But with 12 to 15-year-olds eligible very soon, with moving beyond the emergency authorization, hopefully sometime summer into the fall, that happens also. We're going to start to see that population basis vaccination rate really, I think, move up meaningfully from where it is. But right now, we're probably going to max out somewhere around 60%, 60 to 65% population vaccinated across Iowa. And it's going to be hard to get beyond that for some time. So we have a few more minutes. I think we'd set aside an hour. So for anyone who's not fast in typing or not confident in using the chat, maybe we should just invite, if anyone wants to unmute, if there's questions or comments, you can maybe raise your hand to be recognized, and Meg can help a little bit with this, maybe to see and call on folks or help them unmute. Ceiling fans, on or off during service? I would say on. Mark agrees there. Yep, thumbs up on that one. The question just came in.
I would add with doors open.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And, if rain and humidity is a factor and you're thinking about your organ, maybe either limiting capacity or worshiping online still, just allowing the weather to be a factor in this. If you can't open the doors because it's too wet and rainy and humid, then, maybe Zoom is the right mode to be in for that particular day. So anyone want to unmute and ask a question?
It's just going to take time.
We'll allow a nice long awkward pause.
Yeah, it's just going to take time.
Well, it's also going to take time to, maybe what you mean is it's going to take time to just
Just
bring everyone back and establish these practices. And yeah,
because I'm sure that I have congregants that want to do everything right now.
Yeah.
Music, we got to add it all back in and going, we haven't had any music since March 15th of last year. Except for me, that's it. So yeah, it's add in just a few little things like maybe just do the Gloria and the Sanctus. They're far enough apart and we know they're short. I would like to sing them because I can't remember the words when I speak it because I sing it so much, you know, and then maybe a verse at the end, but keeping things spread out and not, like you said, keep it simple. That's what I was looking for. Thank
Yeah,
you.
don't add everything back. Don't immediately go back to the way it was, but start simple and modest.
Well, they're out of shape like the rest of us are, so we have to build up their stamina.
great. Well, Mark, any final thoughts or comments as we wrap up?
Only to just direct people to that, the resources that you pointed to at the beginning, if they have questions, those are solid, reputable resources to go to. And also feel free to contact me. I'm happy to answer questions directly.
Great. Well, thank
Okay.
you, Mark. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you both very, very much, and everyone for participating. Near the end, I got a little hint that we were beginning to enter into the world of the music directors. They were talking about their people not being quite up to it yet, or the fitness. I find that I sing low into my mask and discover I've kind of got to go an octave lower because there's not enough air that's getting me up to where my normal pitch might be. But I also find reading the verse as though you're leading people into a song. So you sort of read half a verse before the music actually gets there, and then the music comes, and then you read the next half and the music comes, and you're just reading it to yourself. You wonder, why am I in tears? Because the two combine in a new way and in a powerful way, and it's really it's another way of going through, of performing that sort of that combination of he who sings praise twice. Let's finish with a prayer, just a prayer very familiar to all of us that kind of covers everything. Quite a good prayer to be mindful of the needs of others. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, Lord Christ, give rest to the weary, bless the dying, soothe the suffering, pity the afflicted, and shield the joyous, and all for your love's sake. Amen. So blessings on you all, and thank you so much, Mark and Patrick and the task force, and for all of you for your questions. And we'll see. We've got returned back to normal services, I think, on the normal Tuesday afternoon services of Zoom. I don't know when it will be, probably 2 weeks from today. So, all right. So good night.
Good night.